ask you to give a rousing welcome to Jessica Ernst from Rosebud, Alberta.
Thank you very much. I am Jessica Ernst. I am suing the Alberta government, Encana Corporation, and the Energy Resources Conservation Board for unlawful activities. This is my water. It is not photoshopped. You can find a lot more information about me and the legal case on the website, ernst-encana.ca, and you can read the statement of the claim there. And I try to upload current news on fracking. I'm going to tell you that laws and regulations do not protect us from oil and gas, never mind hydraulic fracturing. You add hydraulic fracturing to the mix, and everywhere that I have spoken to people affected, it's a pretty dangerous and scary mix. We have in Alberta, my story that I'm going to tell you, the best in the world, world-class regulator and regulations. A few acronyms you need to know. CBM is coal bed methane. Did you know you have that up here in the Yukon? You also have shales. NGC is natural gas from coal. The companies and the regulators and politicians love to switch names to keep us all confused. Fracking has got such a bad global rap now that they're calling it stimulation, which sounds much more sexual and pleasing. Our National Energy Board has a document. You can find it on the Legal Case website. They talk about the biogenic shales in Canada. These are not just thermogenic resources they are going after in fracking. Thermogenic is methane produced by heat and pressure. Biogenic, it's even stated by our national regulator. Bacteria feed on the organic matter and release biogenic methane. Everywhere that water is going bad, they are blaming bacteria. How many people here do not know what fracking is? You don't know what fracking is. I'm going to let you find out for yourself after this presentation. To give a very quick overview, what they are doing, we have run out of the good stuff. We've wasted it shamefully around the world. And now we have to shatter formations underground to force otherwise resources that naturally are tightly absorbed, that do not want to let go by nature. We need brute force to force these to let go. It's an experiment. Industry has admitted they don't know what they're doing. So here in this diagram, this is a coal bed methane well, a vertical fracked well. Here's a deep horizontal shale. Here's a water well. What they're not showing, this is a regulator document, and they are not showing that the companies are fracturing thousands of wells in Alberta where the fresh water is, above the base of groundwater protection. You have a lot of waste, a phenomenal amount of waste with this. Here's a waste disposal well. Notice also that some of the regulator documents show shales above the base of groundwater protection. The cumulative effects of this is incredible. They tell us the casing protects us in our water. They do not tell us they have to perforate holes in the casing. Thank you. Technical adjustment. They don't tell us that they are blasting holes in the casing, which puts our groundwater at risk. And they are doing sometimes 24 perforations per casing, and they frack and refrack and come back and perforate more and more and more. A few key players in my story. Encana, they spun off their riches to Cenovus. Our energy regulator, the Utilities Board, after they were caught breaking the law and spying on Alberta citizens, they changed their name to the Energy Resources Conservation Board. Our water regulator has changed names so many times I won't tell you them all, but through my story, for the most part, they were Alberta Environment. Our research council got involved. They too changed names after they wrote incredibly shoddy, biased reports dismissing all the contamination cases in Alberta. Mine isn't the only one. And they changed names with an Encana logo I have there that I'll tell you about a little bit of hanky-panky later on. When they were the research council, they boasted about meeting the needs and priorities of industry. Researchers in Saskatchewan collected almost 1,000 water wells and spring samples looking at baselines. They found most of the samples had no detectable methane, and methane concentrations were highest where petroleum energy drill bore density increased. Of the samples that had methane, more than 95% had less than 0.3 milligrams per liter. I will remind you of this later on. 1985, big explosion in Los Angeles. 23 people were seriously injured, millions in damages. The headline, explosion may be tied to abandoned oil field. This is methane burning through the parking lot. Here it is again. The fire chief said this could take months for this to burn off. They threw together a task force. There was a class action lawsuit that came out of this. Unfortunately, as with most contamination cases and the oil and gas industry, there was a gag order and they settled out of court. Their task force concluded with a very quickly written report. The gas that caused this was biogenic, made by bacteria, and the rising water table forced the gas into the store and it ignited. Historic data on some of the wells in my community, gas present, yes or no? No, including on my water well, including on a county well. Here's the actual records. You can't read it, so I blew up the important part. This is 1986, historic record on my water well. 2,300 such records my legal team looked at. Only 4 within 50 square kilometers of my water well had a gas present that could be methane. 4, they began the shallow fracking experiments. They're not just fracking for coal bed methane, most of them are, but they're also fracking other formations. They're also fracking deep. How many of you have heard the lie that there has never been a documented case of water contamination from fracking? I've heard it at least 1,000 times. At least. The EPA was even lying. They have, this was exposed last summer, since the 80s, 87, documented case of fracking causing contamination to groundwater and well water. What's interesting about this story is the company implicated, Kaiser, is now planning to frack Calgary for oil within 70 meters of known zones of sour gas. They will never get the children out of the schools in time if they frack out. What's important too is hundreds of other cases came out of this that were reportedly sealed by gag orders. I do not believe that this is lawful. I think they should be made illegal. Water moves, it belongs to all of us. I don't believe anybody has the right in exchange for money to silence the contamination that has happened to water that belongs to us all. I am not doing my lawsuit for money. I am doing my lawsuit for the data. I will not sign a gag order. 1993, Husky found this to be such a serious problem. Now we're talking about gas migration before they even began the ignorant brute force fracking. They studied it. These are their key conclusions. Big problem, expensive to fix. What do all companies not like to do? Spend money on environment or us. Difficult to completely stop. 46% of the energy wells they tested had gas migration. This photograph is unconventional gas development in my community. They must post the legal land descriptions of their wells. It is an unprecedented invasion. Road damages, unbelievable. The noise, the loss of the light sky. There are so many other impacts. I could probably talk to you for weeks. I can only tell you a small part of the story. It's an incredible cumulative impact. Do we want to do such an invasive, highly energy intensive extraction method to get very little out, causing so much damage? And Husky, in their report, had this wonderful quote. This is in the 90s. Could some part of the problem be attributable to those bacteriological methane, or bacteria making bacteriological methane, or biogenic methane, leaking up the energy well bores? I thought this was the first time industry had the idea to blame nature for their very serious, expensive problem that they can't fix. They already started in the 80s with the LA explosion. Chafin, a big study in America. There was also another class action lawsuit when they started the coal bed methane developments there, and their experimental fractures, lots of water wells went bad. Again, unfortunately, settled out of court, gag order, we'll never know. The Geological Survey did a big study, very important conclusions, we never hear about this. Did not find nature or bacteria to blame. Gas wells are more important. then natural fractures for the upward migration of gas. Man-made migration pathways probably introduced most of the gas near surface. Again, a photograph in my community, 34 Encana unconventional wells, each one of them repeatedly perforated and fractured. Our big oil and gas lobby group, CAP, they studied it also. They retained the Research Council in Saskatchewan, multi-year report, quite thick. Their title admits migration of industry's methane into groundwater. This is the actual scan of their title. And they did the same thing my legal team did. They looked at 24,000 historic water well records. Actually, they didn't do the looking. The regulator did, Alberta Environment. They asked Alberta Environment to do it. And they found 17 had a gas present that could be methane before oil and gas, and 41 after oil and gas. Now, this is before the new brute force hydraulic fracturing. What's incredible about this is exactly the same percentage after oil and gas development as before the intense experimental fracturing, same percentage that my legal team found of water wells historically with methane in my community. Here's the records there. This is before oil and gas, water wells with a gas present that could be methane, after oil and gas, both though before the new brute force experiments. They said methane in water provides useful data as groundwater used in the region. Yes, they found methane in most of the water wells they looked at. Most, however, less than 0.05. In the report, they had two that were just over 1 milligram per liter can pose risk of explosion if the contaminated water passes a confined space. This is my home. I bought my place in 1998. It's beautiful. You have incredible beauty here. It was incredibly beautiful where I lived. That's the old Rosebud River on my land. The cropland belongs to my neighbor. The grassland is mine. Now some researchers looked at the task force report from the explosion in LA 15 years later. Imaginative, troublesome legal issues eliminated. How handy. Unscientific, happy, blameless ending. This is the most important quote that I have read or found in my decade of living fracked. The implication being that the methane hazard could exist virtually anywhere, so no human agency was at fault. No oil company, no regulator, no public health, no Department of Energy or Ministry of Mines. 2001, Hutchinson, Kansas. First responders had a heck of a time dealing with these explosions. The contamination moved underground 3 miles the next day, killing 2 people. That's the water there. Trican and Husky. Trican's a big frack company in Calgary. They teamed up to do a peer-reviewed paper, and the energy wells they looked at, 12 to 80% leaking. Our ministers of the environment across the country held a very important workshop. I have not read this in any of our mainstream media. I had never heard about this until years later. Regulators attended. Key conclusion, unconventional natural gas development poses real risk. Has your regulator told you that here in the Yukon? No. They didn't tell me either. Canada needs baseline hydrogeological investigations to recognize and track contaminants. They're still not doing this at all. Canada didn't care. They started experimenting on extremely shallow fracks in my community in 2001. The most shallow perforation, 100.5 meters below ground level. That is evil. They didn't tell us. They didn't give the pregnant women and children a chance to avoid using the water. They didn't monitor the groundwater. They didn't tell us. They violated pretty well everything we have in Alberta to protect groundwater and people and health. In 2004, they perforated and fractured repeatedly directly into the drinking water supply, and my water well, as well as other water wells, and not into my water well, but the supply to my water well and others in my community, and did not tell us. The stop sign has Encana legal land descriptions on it. This is how much they respect the law. They didn't even have time to post in a separate post. That's changing a stop sign. My life began with noise, lots and lots and lots of noise. I did not know most of what I just shared with you. I did not know most of what I will share with you, and much more. A lot of noise. Encana continues to violate my legal right to quiet. I don't need a lot of things in life, but quiet and night sky and water are a few of the things that I cherish, and I've lost them. A neighbor came to me and said, Jessica, my water well went bad when Encana did some wells. I found out later they were extremely shallow. He wanted more, Encana wanted more. I didn't want to keep the money from him, so I said, well, I'm not going to object. He said, you better get your well tested. I called Encana, asked for a test. They came and tested. Now they're saying on their website that I'm uncooperative and refuse to allow them to test my water well. Well, there it says Encana right on it. Encana. You can't read what's most important about this. This is 2003, this is after they had already experimented above the freshwater zone, but before they fractured directly into our aquifer, water appearance clear. The driller did not report presence of gas in my water. This is a test by Encana. Our research council had a report, it was available publicly, that said natural release of methane from coal seams in Alberta is rare. Why do they have to frack? Because nature doesn't want to let it go. So man has to come and force it to let go. And yet they're blaming nature when water wells go bad. I went public with this and it was pulled off the internet. Casing expert in Canada, Maurice Dussault, leaking methane gas from thousands of resource wells posed massive environmental problems. I don't see nature in his conclusions. Escaping methane changes the water, creates aquifer problems. Now we go back to Hutchinson. For years, they did a very serious investigation there with isotopic fingerprinting of the gases, and they proved that those gases were industries from leaking well, and they killed 2 people. They migrated almost 7 miles. Back to Los Angeles, 20 years later almost, more research on the task force, more research on data that was uncovered. Industries leaking well casing and high pressure injections, which is what fracking is, basically, caused the gas. They caused a slip, caused the gas to come in under the store. No, it was not bacteria, and no, it was not a rising water table. This is the data on Encana's gas well that fractured directly into our drinking water supply. March of 2004, 24 zones perforated. This is energy regulator data. This is Alberta water well data. This was put on Alberta's water well database. They intended to fracture our drinking water supply. This was not a little boo-boo. I blew that up for you. The most shallow at 121 meters below surface. They didn't tell us. A manager with the regulator admitted in a public document, shallow operations can be high risk. When I linked to this with my legal case website in April of 2011, it has since been pulled from public view when it was available for 7 years. I saved it, I've uploaded it to the legal case website. Encana retained a hydrogeological firm to do an investigation because water wells began going bad. These are the first water wells that went bad. This is one aquifer, here's another, my water well's over here. Here's Encana's perforations and cracks. It's admitted in a document. Still to this day, we do not know what chemicals were injected above the basic groundwater protection in my community or even directly into our water supply. From Freedom of Information that I did, took years and lots of hard work to get these results. They couldn't even fix the mess they created. Pressure cracked the remedial cement. We are told this is safe. Maybe it is if human beings were all perfect. Encana investigates itself, and they and our regulator blame our local water well driller. Neighbors came to me asking for help because Encana was trying to get kind of a blanket approval document signed without answering any questions. I looked at the document, I said, this is in violation of the consultation requirements, I'll talk to the manager. I did. I was working for Encana as a consultant at the time. I said, consult with the people, tell them what you want to do. Albertans are more accommodating than anywhere else in the world. No, he says, if we can get them to sign this document, we don't need to consult. So I talked a long time. He finally agrees to hold a community meeting, and a few days later, my neighbors come back saying that I do lousy work because the same lying landman is back with the same inappropriate document. My community, I realize now, was being lied to. I had been lied to. I had to resign. How could I work for a company lying to me and my community? Apparently it raised such hell in the company. I didn't abandon the project. I finished the project to the very end. I did not charge them for my time because I thought it was inappropriate after resigning, but the manager on that project tried to figure out how to fire me the next day. Too late. The noise is getting worse. Encana does non-compliant noise studies. One of the things they did, the noisiest compressor, they turned off for the noise study. They put their microphone almost 1,000 meters away from my home. The regulations say it has to be 15 meters from my home. And I find out, I believed we had best in the world regulation. And I've worked in this industry 30 years. They fooled me. They lied to me, they fooled me. And when I realized that we don't have regulation, well, we have the regulations, we don't have enforcement, so what good are they? What we have are regulators that suck and blow at the same time. Encana finally did their open house. They looked us right in the eye and told us, we will never fracture anywhere near your drinking water supply. We will only be way deep below the impermeable layer to prevent gas from migrating into your water. This was October, March of this year. They had already directly fractured into our drinking water supply. Companies are still fracturing above the basic groundwater protection in Alberta like crazy. And they promise a little bit of money to the community, one part of the community, which effectively silences almost everyone. A few months later, our concrete water reservoir blew up in a serious explosion, injuring a worker. They blamed a propane torch, blamed the worker. Last fall, I was going through archived newspaper articles, and I found this quote, an investigation said accumulation of gases. There's the old water tower, there's the new, it's now underground. Encana promised $150,000. This cost the community almost $700,000. Plus our roads, seriously degraded. We paid to fix them. My water dramatically changed, whistling taps, my water well became a better gas well. Incredibly painful caustic burns to skin, painful cracks on my hands after doing dishes, soaps and suds stopped. I had not changed any soaps. I used to have very wonderful soft water. Gas spurting water out of toilets and tubs, so the edge of the tub would be wet, the toilet seat would be wet, but I didn't know what it was. I thought it was menopause coming. My family had warned me that the women in our family suffer terribly, blotchy skin and all that kind of thing. And I thought it was the plumbing. And it wasn't until, because I believed the lies, they conned me. It wasn't until one day I poured fresh water for my dogs and they backed up away from it in revulsion. And it hit me, they've been lying. And then I started to dig. This is my water after fracking. Do you remember the 2003 data said water appearance clear? Some of my colleagues that had studied gas migration from industry came to have a look. One of them loaned me a methane detector because he says you're living in danger. I no longer have my water connected to my home. It's too dangerous to even be connected. I can't even use it for toilets. Well, the noise gets worse, and the ERCB tries to match all of Encana's non-compliance. I put out a warning email, and I was dashing off to the airport to come here to talk to the communities to warn them about coal bed methane. And I come home after a grueling week of having my charter rights infringed, and I was banished in writing by the same manager that had done that shallow fracking can be high risk presentation. There's the letter. I blow it up for you. They copied the RCMP and their surveillance branch and security people that got fired in the spying scandal. There's tons of articles that have been pulled from the mainstream media that I have posted to the legal case website if you want to read about a regulator spying on you to protect the polluting companies, to get away with what they want. I asked questions. Under what jurisdiction can you find a citizen guilty without proving them so? Are we supposed to be innocent until proven guilty? I asked a number of other questions. This is how serious they took my banishment. They were just trying to intimidate me. Single woman, middle-aged. She'll shut up. I had a neighbor standing beside me when I opened this, the first letter, and she was so scared she sat down. She said, "What if they throw you in jail?" Well, you'll have to get someone to take care of my dogs and bring me my laptop. So I saw this and I thought, whoa, I've got to dig more. And that fact showed up in my mailbox the day this was on the front page because an Edmonton Journal reporter had read some of the articles about me up here in the Yukon, wanted to meet me, and the data came the day they came to interview me. That's my water. Shallow fracturing directive finally comes out, pretty well 6 years too late. What's important in this is that industry admitted that they had shallow fracks shooting out other wellbores, damaging them, and that they didn't know what their shallow fracks did. Again, when I went public with this, the regulator pulled this directive off, changed it, and put it back without these damning statements. I saved the original, I've uploaded it to the Legal Case website. A technical briefing, if water supply is a problem, Encana will supply it. That's a lie, they don't. The legislature, they realized they screwed up, they failed us, they promised safe alternate water now and into the future, regardless of whether the methane is natural flow or not. And they finally came to test my water, and before they even got any data, the water tester, who was visibly shook up by how much gas was in my water, said, well, you don't have cattle, you're to blame because you don't use enough water. That is best in the world science in Alberta's oil and gas industry. 3 days later, the environment minister and his hydrogeological staff held an emergency meeting with us and told us we were to blame because we used too much water. This is the sacrifice zone. That's my water well, approximately about 6 miles straight from it. The red solid dots are gas wells that were perforated and fractured and or above, more shallow than 200 meters below the surface, 11 of those more shallow than 175. They promised us they would never be near our fresh water. The circles, the fainter ones, the red, all of the red is above basic groundwater protection. There are many that are black. These are legal for deeper unconventionals and conventionals. It is an unprecedented cumulative impact. It becomes a war zone. I feel like I'm living on the front lines of a war. So all of those wells were fractured and perforated up here. Not where the regulator shows it, below basic groundwater protection. And in 2006, the government mandated baseline testing years too late for most communities in the Horseshoe Canyon Play in Alberta. That's disgusting. That's an insult to Albertans that have lived with a lot of impacts for this industry and supported it for decades. The government can fingerprint where gases come from. They did this on 3 water wells in Rosebud. They knew that the fingerprints, especially on the ethane, propane, and butane, indicated match to Encana's shallow gas wells in my community by 2 separate labs. They didn't tell any of us. I found this out via Freedom of Information. That's one of the pages of the results. Some of the chemicals in our water. The presentation that I gave Saturday, the full presentation today is a condensed, is available on my website for you to go through the slides if you want more information. Hexavalent chromium was found in a monitoring well by the regulator. They didn't tell anybody. Some of the chemicals in my water, the chromium went up by a factor of 45 after Encana fracked the aquifer that supplies my well. Potassium, barium, strontium doubled. Never mind the methane. Other man-made toxics, petroleum, evidence of petroleum distillates. This is how Encana treats the chemicals in my community. This is in the pouring rain. This is what we have in our water for methane, 30 to 66 milligrams per liter. It's incredibly dangerous. A peer-reviewed report came out in 2008 that thinks we have 3 times this because of shoddy sampling by the government. 1 milligram per liter is risk of explosion if the water passes a confined space. The historic baseline that I could get my hands on, Saskatchewan, most of the water wells had less than 0.3 milligrams per liter. The big oil and gas lobby group, most had less than 0.05. The government finally agrees to an investigation comprehensively. They fought us tooth and nail. If you don't look, you don't have to find a guilty party. They changed labs halfway through to a lab that detected the ethane, did not fingerprint it. They didn't analyze it. They dismissed the contamination as natural. The Research Council blamed bacteria. There's much more to this story, but I'm giving you a shorter version. They avoided the most damning data. and instead went to energy wells fracked deeper over 100 miles away. They refused to give me that data, by the way. We go public with a press release saying we do not agree with the government shutting the cases. On this very same day, Encana donated $7.5 million to the University of Alberta. They were the first lab that indicated the match to Encana's shallow gas wells. They take away our water. They say the dangerous toxic water is safe. I'm not that stupid. I haul my own. Sometimes you have to wait a long time. You have to pay. I drive 45 minutes. That's my little load. My little dog Magic, he always insists on coming along even when it's way too hot. Breaks my heart. I don't know why. Whenever he sees me loading the paraphernalia for water hauling, he insists on coming. We're home now. There's the insult of the new water reservoir. I have to look at it all the time, even from the back of my house. I gave up my laundry room, the water storage tanks. National News does a very short segment on my explosive water. It's not just flammable, it's really explosive. And how badly the regulator treated me. The very next week, starting on the first Monday, it's not Prime Minister Harper coming to apologize. It's not the regulator saying, geez, we violated your charter rights, we're going to make it right. They sent the RCMP. We had served the legal papers on the parties just recently. This was purely intimidation. We had spoken to these officers, telling them, my lawyers talked to them, we emailed them. She has been through enough. We will come to you. We will answer any question you want. No, here they came. The big guy, when he saw it, when he heard my camera, oh, you can't take photographs of us, we're undercover. I said, yeah, you're trespassing. Yeah, but people give in. The people in Alberta have been so abused, they give in. And I think it's really important that we as Canadians stop giving in. I didn't let them come in the house. I had them phone my lawyer. The lawyer said, do you have a warrant? No. He sent them away, but I decided with Harper's anti-terrorist law that I probably better answer their questions. So we did a little discussion on the deck, and I gave the lead interrogator a metal deck chair, and I took the wooden one. It was February, it was cold. I offered tea with honey. I offered Kleenex when his nose started to run. So you might want to buy yourself metal deck chairs, because when they frack up north, that's the way in, and then they'll frack here. So if the contamination is natural, would they spend your tax dollars sending you to RCMP to intimidate a middle-aged woman who's a scientist in the patch who's just speaking out? National Energy Board, rate of development of shale gas may become limited by the availability of required resources such as water. That's 2009. Did your regulators tell you that? Water is the limiting factor. Little is known about the impacts. Deep and shallow shales, there are so many regulator documents that are admitting this. I took most of them out for this shorter version today. And they've admitted fracking is a risk and can contaminate drinking water aquifers. 17 times more methane in water wells. They have now quantified what they knew in the 90s and the 80s. A very important study out of Duke University. Fish-scale shales in Alberta are reportedly radioactive. When they frack you again and again and again. It is never enough. Last year, Encana applied to drill directionally under my land and frack me some more. My land is already contaminated. My water too dangerous to have connected to my home. The regulator gave them approval in a day. I asked, what are you going to do with the radioactive waste? Will you dump it? Where? Oh, the regulator said, don't worry. They won't dump it adjacent to your land. This is the boundary of my land here. Rosebud River Valley is gorgeous. Cumulative effects, compressors. Encana's sort of PR, non-functioning noise control here, a straw metal wall that rots every once in a while and falls over. These trucks are collecting the waste from the drilling under my land. So sure enough, they didn't dump it adjacent to my land as the regulator promised. This is agricultural land, this is our bread. They dumped it half a mile over. Encana has a document that says, don't worry, we work it in right away to prevent harmful effects. I'm a scientist. I went back a month later. They didn't work it in. The day we photographed the dumping, it was really windy, and the kids and adults were coming out of the church. It was a Sunday, and you could see the waste going airborne. So we're breathing it. Someone in Michigan said, what's going to happen to the to the frac flow back, the waste, the drilling waste? What are they going to do with it all? And I said, well, we're going to eat and drink it. Frac flow out, Alberta, best in the world. A man came home, here's an abandoned oil well. They were doing a deep shale on this one. The fluids were shooting way high up out of this well door, abandoned. He calls the regulator. They do not answer their phone. He calls a group, like your Yukon group, for help. They help. They don't get paid. He had to go to the frac crew. They didn't even know they had to have a inlet or a frac out. They were still fracking away. He had to shut them down. Those workers do not know what they are standing in. The trees were dripping in frac fluid. All this dark was the spray. Intentional dumping of waste. A man going down the county road saw this happening, stopped the driver. What are you doing? Oh, don't worry, he says, it's just water. The citizen was smart. He knew we don't have any regulation. He called the police. The police came. A mother with 2 kids waited for her husband to come home to take care of the kids. Well, waited until they were in bed. She went to do the inspection, take the photos. The ERCB said, we're aware of the release. They didn't go. Why not? If you don't go, no statistic. It reeked of diesel. This was taken days later. If this was water, you wouldn't see it. Alberta's very dry. So, is it natural methane migration? We have Hutchinson. We have Spirit River, Alberta. Bruce Jack, his water well. Finally, after years of fighting the government, he got industry testers to come. 2 industry men and Bruce himself. He turned the water well on, seriously injured in an explosion. They all ended up in hospital. Bruce, for a month, Bruce had to sell his herd. That needs to be front page in the papers everywhere. Tioga County, Shell was fracking. This is just new this year. Geysers happening, methane and water. So for me, 8 years of hauling water. 2 by the government. 2 years I was bathing in who knows what. 6 years I've been hauling my own. It's a chore I despise because of all the violations that came with it. And then, this is my replacement water. This is the Red Deer River. Plains Midstream had a sour crude spill, massive spill. They just announced that they are toning down the remediation. I've spoken to citizens in the area and people that have gone looking, including a county councilor with his jet boat. They haven't finished cleaning it up. They've already detected BTEX in the drinking water supply of some places. That's where I get my replacement water from. Nationwide in America, they covered a house in Bainbridge, Ohio that was blown off its foundation in an explosion because of industry's gas migration. They insured that home. A few years later, they've come out and they will not insure properties with fracking. Too great to ignore the risks. Insurance companies are in the business to make money. They're smart. If it was safe, they'd insure it. Earthquakes. Did you guys hear about the study that just came out of your neighboring regulator in British Columbia, Northeast BC? What's interesting here is in this past year in the UK, fracking was linked to waste disposal for fracking, and they did a serious investigation. The government shut the fracking down to look into it. They're demanding extreme monitoring, so much so that the company's complaining they won't be able to make any money. The second quake was found to cause deformation to the structure of the well. That's important. If we already have 12 to 80% of energy wells leaking without earthquakes, without intense fracking. In British Columbia, 272 earthquakes have now been linked directly to fracking, not just waste disposal. 38 were bigger than the 2 in the UK, and it's full steam ahead. Quebec, The new Minister of Natural Resources, she said she does not even think there will ever be a day this can be done safe. She's seeking an outright ban. Where do I go? I've been trying to figure out for months where to go to get water. Where do I go? Where will you go? Thank you. So a few questions. There's time. Yes.
Have you been able to make this presentation to our oil and gas people here?
I was told that they were all told about the one on Saturday, which was the full presentation. What I'm finding everywhere I go in Canada, some of the politicians, not the regulators, but the politicians went, and county politicians went to some of my presentations. And the county people had already told me before, the councillors, that they were completely opposed to fracking. The NDP government in Nova Scotia has betrayed the people there, because they're full steam ahead. They're saying they have a moratorium, but they're allowing the radioactive frack waste from New Brunswick. And I was stunned because one of the politicians was trying to put words into my presentation to make it political, to discredit all the science. He was so uncomfortable by what he heard that he stayed to the bitter end. I commend him. Most of the places I've gone, they don't want to know, because then they can continue along the path of pushing it forward. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want us to know the truth. This information, yeah, I'm throwing it at you in a very short period of time. It's taken me massive, thousands of hours, years to uncover. And in other countries of the world, though, politicians want to know, and they come.
Well, the reason I ask is because, I mean, I hear what you say. I just got a reply yesterday from our oil and gas guy, James Ewart, because I emailed him, I mean, like everybody else probably has in this room, saying, you know, I'm not a supporter of fracking. And he wrote me back this email saying all the nice, cushy stuff about regulations in place, da, da, da. And I got this email yesterday, and I haven't yet replied to him because I don't know what to say. But I mean, can I just like put the link to your thing?
It's a great idea.
And say, I don't believe you, sorry. You know, with all due respect, here's a counter argument.
Or don't even say that. Say, thank you for your viewpoint. I have carefully read your viewpoint. May I ask you to look at the experience of someone where they have the best in the world and who's living it personally. Would you please carefully review all the slides? You can go to the Legal Case website. There's Shale Shock Media did a great job of a presentation I did in New York. Send the link of the actual human video of the presentation, but send him Saturday's slides. And I mean, the evidence is all there. The regulator documents are there. And the National Energy Board document that I refer to quickly, they admit, even the Ontario Natural Resources Minister has admitted they're going to frack the biogenic methane that's being created in real time. It's that shallow. That means it's high risk for our water. That's a really good thing to do, and a very easy thing to do, because you don't have to give your opinion. Excellent idea. But I mean, it's good to give your opinion too. But why I'm saying that is because then you can present somebody else's to the regulator. And another thing to do is write that same type of a letter to the papers and copy your regulators. I'm stunned they want to frack here.
They want to be everything.
I know.
They want to be the big guys here.
But you guys don't really have the infrastructure for oil and gas. It's one thing to, they call it carpet bomb. Industry calls what they did to my community carpet bombing. So it's one thing to carpet bomb an already terribly polluted province. So when do we say we have to protect some parts that are clean? When I got off the airplane, I couldn't believe your air here. I can't have enough showers. I want to take the shower home and the water home, but then they'll say for sure I'm a terrorist. Which, by the way, the government hired a lawyer at the University of Calgary to write a policy document. She misused hearing transcripts, December 2007. Named me, suggested I'm an enemy of the state. This really dishonest document. And recently it was removed off the internet, which I'm wondering if they're recognizing how bad that was to you. But I felt sick. Yeah.
We get a magazine which we from Alberta called Alberta Views.
Oh yes.
And was there an article about you a few years ago?
Yeah.
There was the sunflowers on the front.
Yeah, that was Debbie Signer, and in the longer presentation, in the Shale Shock Media presentation, actually, for the first time, I told the whole story of her water well. And that water well, she was on the cover. It was a brand new well. She has a B&B. And after the fracking, her water well got contaminated. The government came and tested her water well and found no E. coli. And then a month later, they came, and her well is so new, the grass hasn't grown all around yet. It's muddy. It was a very hot, humid day. There was gopher feces. A neighbor had come from the corrals after doing chores with the cattle. She was walking around, the dog was walking around. And our 20-year investigator with the regulator is putting the canister in and out of the mud into her well. They find E. coli. I said to him, and you know what's amazing about that story, you guys? The elders from the Yukon, from your community, came to tour the coal methane fields. And they called up and said, hey, can we see you? And I said, yeah, well, I'm witnessing the government testing a neighbor's water well. Why don't you come along? So we had 7 elders from the Yukon. They signed Debbie's B&B visitor's book. There was myself, a journalist, and I said to the investigator, E. coli kills. You could be introducing a deadly pathogen into that water well. They're still using that water. He admitted later, yes, that's true. So what he did, he didn't say we better shock chlorinate the well and bring the Signer family safe water until we do that. He dumped the samples and just took new samples. They found E. coli. They used that one shoddy sampling event to dismiss all of us with contamination, not just in my community, other communities, Wetaskiwin and Panuka, because we're bad, dirty water well owners. We are contaminating the water. So there's this Rosebud Yukon connection in my story.
I just, I read that magazine and I find it really illuminating because it sort of shows the other side of Alberta. We have a very view of Alberta, very pro oil, but there's lots of people who care about, they're not all about go, and there's a very rich culture down there. But where is where can you, within that intense amount of money, when you talk about the funding to the universities we see it up here with our enormous mining companies coming in, and they're owned by China, throwing tons of money, overdeveloping, and we have such a very nascent in a lot of ways. Our political system is still a bunch of old boys, and I heard from the Premier today there's 37,000 people. I don't know if anybody heard that on the radio this morning. There's now 37,000 people in this territory, which is huge. When I first got here in the mid-80s, it was 24,000 people. Now it's about steady.
I'm going to try to quickly sum that up because we're running out of time.
Sure.
For the others here, the Alberta Views article was October 2006. It's no longer available on the Alberta Views website, but I've uploaded a PDF of it. So for those of you who are interested, that article is about the sampling day the government did when they didn't find E. coli. So it's a fantastic article, that one. The money, well, we have to somehow begin to untrain ourselves, propagandize ourselves in accepting the money in exchange for being abused, for the pollution, for the bribes. What's amazing in Alberta, even though most people are completely pro oil and gas, I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. There are groups demanding a moratorium. The surface rights group that went to help the farmer with the blowout, they demanded in writing. The National Farmers Union chapter of Alberta, an incredible written request for ban. And there's the people around Calgary. The richest postal code, one of the 10 richest in the country, the richest in Alberta, is about to be fracked. And those people are demanding moratoriums because they're experiencing damage from earthquakes already. $6 million homes. That's going to be a very interesting development. You up here in the Yukon, you have unique things to protect. So it would be valuable to get somebody to do a socioeconomic assessment. What's the quiet, the night sky, the tourism, the hunting, fishing, without fracking? What's that worth? Is it worth the little bit of money? We're paying the guys to frack us in Alberta. We're paying 200 meters, a linear meter for the unconventionals. We'll never get a penny out of those ones. Yes?
I don't think Alberta, most of the people who are opposed to the oil and gas industry are mostly like not my backyard. They only go up against it once it affects them directly, rather than indirectly or in the future.
Not necessarily. Industry loves to slam that at us because then you can discredit everybody. What I'm seeing in Alberta are 80-year-old retired women who are living nowhere near the fracking getting concerned. They have grandchildren. People living in some of the small rural towns going to talk to the community swimming pool and seeing frack trucks by the dozens hauling away massive loads of water, way bigger than the photos you saw for fracking. We're giving them our treated water to go down whole. Nobody's studying the impacts, and they're starting to say, is this a smart thing to do? And it's not in their backyard. County councillor, we have no rights in Alberta. He wants to have proper protections for the water. He was basically threatened by the government if you don't behave yourself. The little money the government divvies out to the rural communities, you won't get any. So I would say we have to change our perspective on that. I'm seeing a lot of people who are not living facts protesting and speaking out. And I do see industry and our corrupt politicians and regulators. With unconventional oil and gas, I have never seen such a phenomenal increase in corruption everywhere. The counties, the politicians. So yeah, let's discredit everybody who's raising concern. Good point, though.
Can I just say this one point?
No.
Well, maybe it is a minute to 1 o'clock. But just what we've been told repeatedly here is that Yukon has this deep shale gas place, a mile underground. And the same is said by the British Columbia government and the opposition and so forth. And it would be very different to some of the projects that Jessica. So from our jurisdiction, they would actually say yes to some of the concerns that Jessica has raised, but it's going to be all different here, right? These deep supposedly are safe. Now the casings and the concrete liners, all of that stuff fails, as we know, and they say it doesn't. But where there's a bit of a black and white issue is whether the fracture depth of the shale deposit will actually communicate with the groundwater and surface water a mile above. They're saying categorically no. I raised this issue many times, and there have been many reports, observations that they actually do. Now in the water journal, and this is probably might be interesting for geology people here. There is now a study that clearly shows that the communication between deep shale plays, this is Marcellus shale observations, which are very, very similar to the geology of the White Horse Trough, of the Eagle Plains, of the Peel, actually does happen, and it happens all the time. Because the geology is fissure and fracture, the perfing and fracturing interconnects them, and you get connections on a regular basis a mile and 1.5 miles up from those horizontal wells all the way to the top. You can look that up. If you want a journal, Saturday night we had a few copies printed out there. So they're not saying we don't know our government here and energy mines and resources, specifically runs on tsunamis, all this pushing this. This is an impossibility. These are people who don't know what they're talking about. Yes, we do know what we're talking about, and this has been substantiated. The deep shale play fracturing communicates a mile and a half up to the water.
And to add to that, the National Energy Board's 2009 review on the shale fracking, which they include the horn going up into Yukon, they only recover 20%. So you now have 80% of a released resource in a highly permeable formation now. They've shattered it. They want to do it everywhere. And over time, how much of that 80% will rise to surface? In the Chafin study in the States, that was much deeper CPM than in my community, and they were finding that it was the man-made pathways, fracking in the wellbores, that were causing most of the upward migration. So they also told us, even though they fracked directly into our drinking water supply, they told us what they tell everybody else. No, we're only going to be way deep, way deep. But they lied. In Michigan, they were trying to say, but what happened in Rosebud has nothing to do with Michigan. Well, I found out, I've uploaded it to the legal case website, or linked to it. They've already had a serious incident with shallow fracking in Michigan. Ireland, they want to frack it shallow. Ontario, Quebec, the wells in Quebec, the NEB admits, and I just reread this, I missed this the first time I read it, I can't believe it, I'm still connecting dots. 19 out of 31 brand new shale wells in Quebec, some of them vertical, biogenic, some of them deep, thermogenic, some of them horizontal. 19 out of 31 leaking. They ordered the companies, Talisman and others, to repair their leaks. The companies tried and failed. An agronomist already sent me a photo from a cattle producer with identical water to mine. And they asked me, what are the health implications to this producer's earth? I mean, that's crazy. I'm not a veterinarian, I'm not an agronomist. And I said to him, why aren't you asking your regulators? I'll go somewhere where you,
Where are you talking on Saturday night somewhere?
I did the Saturday we just had, yes.
Okay. Now, what you, obviously you're not working for the company you work for. How are you managing to survive economically?
How I manage, one of your reporters, your media did great service to the public too, by the way, because there's a pretty strong media ban on me in Canada. It would be really useful to thank them, and maybe in a letter to the editor. One of them asked me the same question. I've still been getting work. I was a consultant to Encana, so I have many other clients, but of course it's really trickling down. How do I survive? I was raised partially by a really mean grandfather, step-grandfather, just like out of the fairy tales. War-torn, changed his name so that he could hide that he was Polish because of the war. But he taught me something that nobody's learning in school. And he taught me the value of critical thinking and argument and never bow down. And he taught me the value of saving $1. Even though $1 doesn't buy you anything, save it anyways. So most of my life I've been saving. I never really knew why. I was saving. So if friends were going on a big trip, come on, Jess. And I go, no, I don't want to borrow money. I don't want to. So I'm living off my savings. I'm using my savings for the legal fees. I'm selling everything I have. And my grandfather also taught me, as well as my grandmother, to live incredibly frugally, and I do not believe in debt. We have an amazing amount of power if you say no to debt.
So how do we go about donating money if you want to do that?
There, on the legal case website, there's a donate button, and you can there's a postal address directly to the law firm there in Toronto, or there's a PayPal where you can donate. And I see some really miserable faces. And I don't ever like to leave people with miserable faces. I would never know the power I have or who I am and how much I can rely on myself if not for this fight. So there's positives. I'm seeing a person I had no idea I was. I've learned when I get into a fury, because I do have rages, I cry myself to sleep, I use that energy and try to transform it into a positive. How can I make that positive? And people all over the world are saying no to this and standing united.